everyone, it's Jakov, and I'm back here with a new video for the channel. Sorry I've been away for so long. I had to go take my laptop to be fixed up, so while the repairs were being done I had to wait. Now that I've got my laptop back, I am ready to get back into making videos for the channel. Continuing with the series, Units of Total War Rise Mordor. And today, we've brought a new faction to the channel, that being the Dwarves of Erebor. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the most fleshed out factions that the creators of Total War Rise of Mordor have brought to the game and to the mod. Also, the mod will be linked in the description below so that people can play it, because I want this mod to be as popular as it can be. If you like this type of content, please make sure to like and subscribe. Generally, when it comes to these videos, I look at the faction and look at its history both within Middle-earth itself and in real life, looking at what the creators of their visual appearance and popular culture drew from in order to give them such a distinct look. First off, we'll look at the actual history of dwarves within Middle-earth. Now, dwarves are, I believe, the most ancient species in Middle-earth, being created by one of the Valar before they were meant to be created, because if I remember correctly, Iluvatar, who is the god in Tolkien's Legendarium, he originally intended for the first beings to be made upon his earth to be the elves. However, one of his subordinates, I believe, Orlais or Aor, I'm not too sure how to do the pronunciation for some of these names, he created his own species first called dwarves, which were then revealed to God, who then put them into a slumber until he created his own species to come onto the earth, that being the elves. After that, the elves would have a very long and storied history of interacting with the other peoples of Middle-earth, generally being on the side of the forces of good. However, dwarves were known for being very finicky when it came to such situations. As a result, it was known that there were dwarves who did quite evil acts, such things that they did kicking off the great rivalry and enmity between the elves and the dwarves, where before friendship had laid between both species. By the Second Age, they were quite well fortified within the legendary city of Khazad-dûm, otherwise known as Moria, and generally tried to avoid the greater troubles of Middle-earth, just trying to make money and mine, which were their two great loves in life. Well, mining was their great love in life. Hoarding wealth became a greater love later on. Eventually, though, things began to go badly for the dwarves, with them losing more and more of their strongholds, both their settlements outside of Moria in the northern mountains of Middle-earth, and then eventually losing their homeland to the Balrog of Morgoth, which was discovered lying in slumber underneath the depths of the mountain that Khazad-dûm is built into. After losing their city, the dwarves tried to forge new kingdoms for themselves, eventually creating the Kingdom of Erebor in the Lonely Mountain, and that for a time was kind of their safe haven until the dragon Smaug came out of the north and took that from them, forcing them into exile, and that's kind of where we meet them in the first proper work in Tolkien's Legendarium, that being The Hobbit, where we meet the company of 13 dwarves who are attempting to retake their ancestral homeland. As you know, if you've watched the movies of The Hobbit or read the book, they are successful, even though it's not by their own hands, and they retake the city of Erebor, built into the Lonely Mountain, and that kind of becomes the key Dwarven civilization at the end of the Third Age of Middle-earth, with them having lost Moria and their attempts to retake it failing. During the time of the War of the Ring, the dwarves of Erebor are very solidly on the side of the Free Peoples of Middle-earth, having fought alongside them a generation ago at the Battle of the Five Armies, where they helped destroy Sauron's northern influence for the time being. When Sauron begins to stake up his claims to the Ring, he tries to ally himself with the Dwarven Kingdom of Erebor. However, they rebuff him. As part of his great plan to conquer Middle-earth, he sends forth his armies not only to attack the southern kingdoms of Gondor and Rohan, but he also sends forth his armies from the east to destroy the Lonely Mountain and also the allied kingdom of Dain. Throughout the War of the Ring, these two factions fight side by side against the Easterlings and are steadily driven back across their lands until finally the great battle erupts outside the walls of the Lonely Mountain itself, with the kings of both kingdoms, King Dain Ironfoot, who you see in the Hobbit series, and I believe King Brand of Dale, I believe that's his name, both of them leading their forces in a desperate attempt to prevent the North from being overtaken. And while both kings die in their struggle, they're not unsuccessful, because they end up holding the line long enough for Sauron to be destroyed in the south, meaning that any pressure on the north is lessened considerably, and the three peoples of Middle-earth avoid having their northern flank being overtaken by the forces of Sauron, which if that happened would have potentially changed the course of the war. Having looked at their history within Middle-earth, we now turn to their history in real life, and the dwarves are based on the folkloric being of a dwarf, and as such they kind of tend to stick to a lot of the stereotypes of dwarves, that being smaller creatures than man. Beard thing is pretty big, I'm pretty sure, when it comes to stories about them. Them being great craftspeople is also something that is told in story tales. And Tolkien kind of took this and he chucked in a lot of other elements that would kind of solidify the image of the dwarf in pop culture, especially their obsession with axes as their main weapons, as well as other blunt force weapons. This has really shaped the way we think of dwarves nowadays. You can't say dwarf without thinking of a warrior with a big axe and a big beard who's short, and yeah, Tolkien's the one who can blame for that, or who you can credit for that, as I do, because I think it's quite a nice stereotype in its own way. Within works of Lord of the Rings and its related materials, dwarves do appear most prominently in The Hobbit, as I said before, and as such, they're massively in focus, being amongst the main protagonists of the films, and probably being the one civilization in Middle-earth that we see the most, seeing them both at their height of power and also at their nadir. When it comes to the dwarves that we see in the film, we see mostly the dwarves of Erebor, which makes sense, but we do also see the dwarves of the Iron Hills, so we do get to see some variance between the different civilizations, and that is something that the creators of this mod have definitely implemented, with the faction roster for Erebor having units both from the mountain itself and from the Iron Hills, as well as also having units from further east, which is something I quite like, because there are many different types of dwarves all around the world. It's just that we focus mostly on the dwarves that are found within Middle-earth rather than their more eastern kin. When you look at the Lord of the Rings book series and also at the film series, while dwarves as a civilization aren't prominent, nowhere near, let's say, the Men of Rohan or the Men of Gondor, they do definitely have their representative in their books, who's quite a key character, that being Gimli Glow-in-Sun, who I believe is the archetypal dwarf that we've all come to know. In terms of where the design for the dwarves stems from in real life, I believe probably the closest source we can kind of look to it is just general workers, and I mean that as in, when it comes to the lower tier dwarves, some of them tend to just be general workers who have been appropriated into a war setting. So for example, miners, just the regular miners, are part of the Dwarven roster, and their appearance tends to be pretty close to what real life miners would have worn in the past. When it comes to design, the dwarves of Erebor definitely tend to have a geometric slant to their designs, which makes sense given their connection with mining and delving in the ground, and with architecture, it all kind of gels together. Apart from that, when it comes to what type of armor that they actually wear, I believe it is most close to say that it looks quite a lot like your standard medieval mail, generally, and I say that very, very, very generally, because that's kind of the armor that you normally hear about the dwarves wearing, especially in the books, and I believe that for this mod, the creators took those lines from the book and then extrapolated on it, built upon it, using the visuals of the dwarves in the films. So now that we've looked at the history of the dwarves of Erebor, and dwarves in general, both within Tolkien's history and within real life history, let's take a look at the units themselves, starting off with their one and only unique general unit, Dain Ironfoot, who commands the Sons of the Mountain. And as you can see, these are some very, very heavy infantry. They're shock infantry, as you can probably tell, using those massive two-handed hammers. Just to be clear, weapons like this did not exist in history, at least not this monstrously big and oversized. Some of them do also have axes on the back. However, warhammers this big have snuck into pop culture quite a lot, most notably in materials that are quite fantasy oriented with dwarves as a faction unit, such as say Lord of the Rings, but also stuff like Warcraft, and I'm thinking Warhammer too. Don't quote me on that because I haven't really played Warhammer. But just having large oversized weapons like this is quite a common trope in fantasy, even in stuff like Game of Thrones and the Song of Ice and Fire books. You often hear about characters wielding such massively oversized weapons that in reality didn't exist. So that's my little tangent about big weapons like this. On the other hand, the unit is very well armoured, covered in plate from head to toe. They've got nice big protective helmets with cheek guards. Their legs are defended, their arms are defended, they're in good service. And we'll look at their general, who is in fact Dain Ironfoot, otherwise known as the guy who is played by Billy Connolly in The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies film. However, he is also in the books the Dwarven leader who actually kills Azog the Defiler in the Battle of Azanobazar. That is the battle that you see in the flashback at the start of the Hobbit series, not Thorin Oakenshield as is shown in the films. I love his motif of the wild red boar, as you can see on his helmet. I think it really is a nice way of showing him to be a distinct entity from other characters that you know in Tolkien's Legendarium. Now, as I said before in the history of the Dwarves of Erebor, he and King Brand of Dale both fight side by side against the Easterlings in the War of the Ring, and both of them died defending their homes from Sauron's Dark Hordes. So I find that pretty cool. Apart from that, this unit is, it's bloody amazing. I think it's amazing that the designers of the mod have begun to include distinct unit models to lead military units. And while this is the first faction, I believe, to have distinct units, there are other factions that we're going to cover in other videos who also tend to have commanders who are very much unique. So having said that, that's about all I can say about Dain Ironfoot and his warriors. They're very dangerous. They will smash their way through enemy forces, however they do not have shields. Their armor is very, very good, but against arrows I should say, that's one thing where they're kind of weak. Also, if they get flanked, they can be in quite a bit of trouble. However, if you use them at the right moment, they are absolutely unstoppable. Let's move on to the first of our melee units, lagging, as to be expected, the Dwarven Company. You know what? I like these guys. I like the nice cross-shaped shields. They look quite cool. I like the beards. And yeah, just about every unit that this faction can field has beards, except for one, I think. And even that one, I'm not too sure, but we'll get to that one when we get to that one. They've got nice skullcap helmets. They're reinforced with iron or steel around the edges. Makes sense, you want to make them as strong as possible. They've got cross-section on top of the helmets, where it all comes together to defend against the weakest part of a helmet, which will naturally be its top. However, not all of them are armoured, or at least not all of them have helmets. All of them have shields. Most of them seem to be wearing, I'm guessing, brigandines, which is nice to see, because you don't really see it that often in this mod. Many of them have shoulder armour, nice to see. Some have gauntlets and gloves, also cool to see, van braces. Yeah, now shields, this design I've never seen historically, but I think it's a nice way of showing the shield progression of Dwarven units, that their lowest ranked infantry start off with something like this, and it gradually gets better and better, and more protective as they go up. So, that said, these guys are the lowest of the low of infantry that the dwarves can bring to a battlefield. Building an army without much in the way of money, especially at the start of a campaign or something, these guys will be a bulk of your force. But even so, they can put in somewhat good service for you. They're definitely nowhere near as crappy as, say, the Orc militias or anything like that. They'll do way better against them. Their commanding officer is a bit more ornate. He has a shield that's completely made out of metal, which is much more decorated. His helmet is inlaid with gold. He also has shoulder armor like the rest of his troops, but he wears a metal breastplate to kind of show off him from the rest of his warriors. In terms of weaponry, they've all got dwarven swords, which I quite like. Short swords, kind of similar to the Roman gladius, which kind of makes sense. These guys tend to fight as heavy infantry, and probably the most famous heavy infantry in all of history would be Roman legion, so I do kind of like that. These guys are a definite step up from the Dwarven companions, and in battle these guys will be very, very useful in forming up the bulk of your battle line, or at least the bulk of your melee infantry. Having looked at the Dwarven Company's shields and other such equipment, let's look at their blades. And their blades look very similar to the ones that you see in the Hobbit series, which makes sense, that's where they grabbed them from, and they seem quite short blades, a lot like the blades of Roman legionaries, which cool, I like it. Oh yeah, some of them also, oh this is their commanding, I know, their commanding officer is more heavily armoured and armed than the other guys. He has the same blade, but his armour is, he's got mail from head to toe, or is that scale? I can't properly tell, sorry about that. I'm thinking, oh no, he's got chain mail, or just mail, and then underneath that, covering the tops of his legs, he's got a skirt of scale armour. I quite like that look. He's more heavily armoured than the rest of his troops for sure, and he's got a shield, which is a full-shaped shield, unlike the rest of those used by the other guys. Also, the main shields used by the Dwarven Company are fully metal, and that actually makes sense because in real life, shields that tended to be fully metal tended to be smaller shields, so it kind of makes sense that dwarves would be using smaller shields made of metal. However, even these shields seem a bit on the largish side, I should say. So yeah, just keep that in mind. We'll move up to their big brothers, Dwarven warriors, and we can see what I said about the shields becoming more protective. They've gone from that cross shape to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, it's octagon. Yeah, I think an octagon-shaped shield. I believe that's the name. Don't look. I wasn't good at shapes or maths in school. Shields in this rough shape, yeah, also fits well with the geometrical scheme of dwarves, so I quite like it. Same thing with the other shield. For dwarves, these are fair-sized shields, but if you were to compare it to a fully grown human, I'd say these are more along the lines of really large bucklers. They've got iron rims around the side, which shields generally didn't have in real life, but again, Middle-earth fantasy, I let it go. They've got the iron-covered boss in the centre. That is something that shields most definitely did have, to provide a strong central point, also where your hand could sometimes hold from behind. Still got the beards. They've got much more ornate helmets, and they all uniformly have helmets, even if they're not quite the same. Some of them have more skull cap looking helmets, some of them have more ornate helmets. Nice big cheek guards, big nose guards. Very solid, very, very durable helmets. They seem to have, I'm guessing, if I look at it correctly, they've got mail underneath as their main form of armour, which makes sense, and then probably underneath that they've got what looks like padded jacks, brigandines, leather coats underneath. That's all fair. Sorry about the lag. So yeah, having 3, 2, 1. Having looked at this Dwarven Warriors unit, we'll now move on to their shock troops. Starting out with what I actually really like as a unit, the Dwarven Miners. And if you've seen the Hobbit film series, in the first film when Bilbo goes over the story of Arkenstone, these are what are shown. One of these guys finds the Arkenstone, and I think it's quite cool to see working dwarves within the film universe. As you can see, they're unarmoured, they've just got leather clothing on with safety gear, mining helmets with lights, torches, other such things, and they look cool. They've got the magnificent beards, and they've got pickaxes as their main weapon. And these guys are pretty much the equivalent shock troops for the Dwarven Company. They're pretty damn cool, that's all I'm going to say. They're nowhere near as effective as more upper tiered units, even in other factions that have less skilled warriors, such as say orcs, but even so, these guys can still make a mess out of things if they're used the right way. Which I guess goes for all units pretty much, but still, I really love the look of these guys. As you can probably tell, because they don't have shields, they've got a really bad time of it when facing up against archers or against shock troops themselves. And their general is just another Dwarven warrior. So yeah, it seems that the commanding officers for lower ranking units are just line Dwarven infantry. So yeah, these guys will be your low-ranking shock troops, but there are definitely those who are better equipped. And here they are, the Erebor axes, lagging again. And these guys look amazing. Covered in head to toe in scale armor, with plate van braces, plates, shoulder armor, massive axes, some of them being two-bladed axes, which aren't really a historical thing, others just being nice big one-handed axes, kind of reminiscent of Dain axes, like what this guy is wielding over here. Very nice. Their helmets are big, and I believe their helmets have Avon tails, but I can't properly tell. They might have Avon. No, they don't. They've got full face protecting helmets except for the front, which is often a common thing in history. And they've got no shields, obviously, because they're shock infantry. And the Erebor axes, they look great. Another very historically plausible looking unit with armor such as this, even if the axes are a bit iffy. You really gotta love them. And here is their commanding officer, who is another Dwarven line infantryman, except he's the same commanding officer as the Dwarven warriors would have had, yeah. So he's got the same golden armor, golden helmet, and the same sword. Also, the dwarves wear reinforced boots, which I quite like. So yeah, these are their medium tier, well, they're heavy shock infantry, but in regards to their tiers, they're medium infantry, and these guys will probably be the bulk of your shock troops. Next up, you have Mattock warriors, who also look great. These guys look a bit different from the other shock troops in that their armor is a bit different and their weapons are a bit different. They share the same helmets for the most part, but many of them tend to wear what I'm assuming is meant to be brigandine, and if so, that's a pretty nice choice for the creators of the mod to add it in. Others wear segmented plate. I also like, I can't know if it's meant to be scaled or segmented, but we'll go with it. They've got the same heavy plate covering their arms, same amazing helmets, same amazing beards, and no shields, which makes sense, they're a shock unit. And they've got these absolutely massive mattocks, which, yeah, another polearm weapon, absolutely carved through enemy formations. And I believe in the Hobbit book, this is actually what the dwarf warriors who fight at the Battle of the Five Armies are described as looking like. 500 grim dwarves, all bearing shield, which these guys don't have, short sword, which they don't have, and mattocks, which they do have. So I think it's nice that they decided to add in a mattock unit to the roster. Now let's try and find their commanding officer. And he looks great. He's got the same boar motif helmet as Dain, except his isn't quite as ornate. His shield is the same shield as is used by the men of the Iron Hills, the dwarves of the Iron Hills. So a nice heater-shaped shield, completely made out of metal, which historically not accurate, but Middle-earth it is accurate. Covered in the same tegulated metal, covering his chest, so he's got a tegulated coat of plates, and same metal armor everywhere else, covering his body. And his weapon is the same dwarven, is it? No, it's more of a falchion shaped dwarven sword, which is cool to see. Nonetheless, definitely a very cool looking unit. A bit of a special unit for the faction are the Warriors of the Red Mountain, and these are dwarves who hail from the east of Middle-earth. I believe east outside of Middle-earth. They don't actually even live within Middle-earth itself. They're contemporaries of the Easterlings, and as such they're a bit separate from the dwarves of Middle-earth, but they still fight alongside their brothers. Their design is definitely quite out there. It's very Eastern looking, especially with the helmets and the face masks. It kind of reminds me of a human appearance, and that's actually kind of spot on if you think about it, because the humans were warriors who lived in Eurasia, who often had ties to the eastern continent as well as to Europe, so it makes sense. They've got the feathers or horsehair on their helmets, which is also something that you see in relation to eastern societies, such as say the Mongols. skull caps, the face mask I spoke about, quite very protective. Also looks a bit like the helmets worn by the Vikings, at least the helmet that you stereotypically associate with Vikings, with the eye plates for cover. Like their brothers, they've got beards, and these guys wear nice red undercoats or silk or something like that, over which they put their armor, which is plate for the most part, and I really do like that. Definitely a sick looking unit. Their weapon is a warhammer. Also, yeah, their armor is bronze. That's something I should mention. The armor is bronze, which looks really cool when combined with the red. It gives a really nice aesthetic that's quite similar to that of the Eastern units that we looked at in the previous video. But going back to their weapons are warhammers. They're a bit differently shaped. Are these warhammers, or are they more maws? I'm not too sure. Whatever they are, they're definitely shock weapons. Smash a guy in the chest with that, you'll cave his chest in. Definitely shock troops. These guys, I believe you can only recruit once you capture certain settlements on the world map. But even so, they're definitely a very, very striking unit to look at. Absolutely marvelous. And I love the plated beards. That's a cool look too. And where is their... Oh, okay, their commanding officer looks very, very intimidating. He's got a completely face-covering helmet except for the beard. For anyone in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, but having beards this massive out underneath, in front of view of your opponent, that is a potential danger, isn't it? If someone grabs you by the beard and pulls you forward, you can go off balance. At least I think so. It looks cool and it looks intimidating though. But yeah, someone maybe answer that in the comments if you can. He's got the sick looking helmet, he's got the same shield completely made out of metal, and his armor is plate under which he has scales. So a very heavily armored dwarf. And he's got a diamond shaped sword, at least the tip of it is a diamond shape, which I really do like that. It's a nice way of tying in with the geometric aesthetic of the dwarves. And I believe you see Thorin wielding that kind of sword in the films. But yeah, when he leads the charge out of Erebor against the hordes of Azog, he uses that kind of sword before he gets his hand back on Orcrist. So these are the Warriors of the Red Mountain. Definitely an amazing looking unit. And we'll move on to the next unit, the Erebor veterans. And these guys, as you go up, all I'm going to say is the Dwarven units look cooler and cooler and cooler. These guys look like a mix between knights and hoplites, what with the massive horsehair crests, and then you've got these helmets with the massive golden beards. I'm assuming it's golden, but it's probably just gilded beards that look absolutely amazing. They've got these gigantic warhammers, which are with axe blades at the back, but they're kind of arrow shaped, which also looks cool with spear tips on the end. That looks amazing. They've got the big beards. They're covered in scale from head to toe. Their pauldrons are massive, made out of plate. Their arms are completely covered in plate too. And they don't have shields as with all the other shock troops, but even so, these guys look just absolutely amazing. You're going to hear me say that a lot, they look absolutely amazing, it's the truth. I can't tell though if that motif is a bear on their helmets. I may be wrong about that. Some of them also just have the horsehair crests in red and others have different colours. But still, damn, they look cool. And their commanding officer, now he looks like a badass. He's got the same gold gilded helmet. He's got the same rough body armor as the rest of the unit. But his shield is quite a bit larger. It's kind of like the Dwarven kite shield, which is nice to see. It's red and then or brown, and then on top of it it's got metal borders and a nice big metal boss in the center. It actually looks a bit like a fusion between Dwarven shields and Elven shields. And that's quite nice to see, honestly. And his blade is, yeah, the same sword as what Thorin wields. So a cool looking commander for a cool looking unit, but I think the Erebor veterans look cooler than their commanding officer, if I'm being quite honest. We'll move on to arguably the last of their shock troops, because Dain and his men are also shock troops too, remember? So you might argue they're the coolest looking. The Dwarven Baroque Guards. These dudes wield absolutely gigantic double-bladed axes, which, as I said before, are not a historical thing, but it's something that jumps to mind when you think of dwarf, especially when you see Gimli in the Lord of the Rings film series, when he gets one of these axes from the tomb of Balin in Moria. Their armor looks even more astounding, covered in scale than a big iron breastplate or steel breastplate, or probably even mithril breastplate if we're being quite honest. Their arms are completely covered in heavy armor, and then their face is covered in a completely protecting helmet. None of their face is showing except for their eyes. It looks cool. It looks, not only does it look cool, it's ultra protective too. And helmets like this, which cover your entire face with face plates in it, are a very common thing. Just look at Roman cavalry helmets, they often had such face plates. Although these look, I believe, more protective than those did, if just the thickness of them is anything to go by. The others were more like masks, whereas these look more like helmets with a mask carved into them, if that makes sense. Let's look at their commanding officer. He's the same type of guy as I said before, so I'm not really going to go into detail on him. These guys are your uttermost shock troops. Use them the right way and they'll carve a path through any army. We'll now move on to a type of unit that the dwarves have quite a lot of: axe warriors. They don't just use swordsmen. Or the Erebor units. You see them in the Hobbit film, especially in the first one, when you see Erebor in its glory days before Smaug the Dragon came. That's what the designs for these warriors are based off. The reason why I haven't really gone into where you see the other units from is because you don't actually really see them in the films. They're creations that the creators of the mod have came up with by drawing on inspiration from the design shown in the film, or just from their own imagination. So I can't really say where you see them in the films, because you don't see them in the films. But the Erebor warriors you do see in the films for sure. As you can see, they wield nice big axes, and they're one-armored weapons. I do like this type of axe though, with the two blades kind of shaped. It's a bit like a hatchet, kind of. It's a hatchet axe, kind of diamondish shaped. It's a cool design, is what I'm going to say. Their shields are round, not round, but the octagonal shape, made of metal, and they're covered in plate from head to toe, with the same helmets. They look cool. And these guys will be making definitely part of your line infantry. They're more upper tier than, say, but they're about equivalent with the Dwarven warriors. Maybe a bit better than them though. And yeah, just Dwarven legions of Erebor axe warriors are something to see on the battlefield. And who is their commanding officer? I'm assuming it should be someone right in the middle, but I cannot see a dwarf who looks any different from his warriors at all, so I can't see a commanding officer. So I'm going to have to assume he is just as equipped as the rest of his unit. The next axe unit that they have though are the Mansion Reclaimers, and again, see what I mean about them looking more and more awesome the more high tier you go. These guys look amazing. They're covered in what I can only assume is mithril from head to toe. They've got plate armor covering their chest, covering their shoulders, covering their legs, or their legs have got armored skirts, but I'm assuming underneath the front of those skirts they've probably got armor covering their legs, like greaves and fleeces and all such things. They've got the same shields that I showed before, except these shields are silver coloured rather than red, but it's the exact same type of shield. They've got big one-handed axes that are a little bit more elaborate looking than those wielded by the Erebor axe warriors. Their helmets are amazing, with the golden beards. That's just such a damn amazing look to have. Very heavy axe infantry. These guys will hold the line for ages, and they'll be pretty good at attacking through enemy forces, combining the skills of shock troops and of line infantry to a lesser degree. Just, yeah, absolutely amazing troops, but I don't think you're going to be able to build up your army with these guys. There's almost certainly going to be a limit on how many of them your army has. And their commanding officer is equipped much the same as the rest of them, except his shield just kind of pales in comparison to theirs, and his armor also pales in comparison to theirs. So those are the axemen that Erebor can bring to the battlefield, but they do also have spearmen. starting with the Erebor Spear Guards. They're equipped the same as the other Erebor Axe Warriors. The only difference is that they use nice big spears with these langlets sticking out of the side. Big spears, these guys will definitely hold the line as an effective spearman unit, and you do see them in The Hobbit. You see them guarding King Thor, or Thrain, or whatever the name of Thorin's granddad is. I always get his granddad and his dad mixed up. But yeah, an eternally cool looking unit, and one that will be making up the bulk of your spearmen. And no commanding officer that I can see who stands out from the rest of the crowd. The more elite spear unit that they bring to the battlefield though are the Iron Guards, who use different shaped shields, this time using the Dwarven equivalent of heater shields, which look amazing, covered in a metal boss in the middle. They look, just amazing as I said. They've got these more ornate looking spears with which are multi-sectioned. I don't really know about this shape with the sectioned part there, but spears with that big spike shape are definitely historic. They're covered in plate, some of them have gilding, if not all of them have gilding on their shoulders to show that they're elite infantry, and these guys do appear in the films. These are actually the soldiers that Dain Ironfoot brings to the Battle of the Five Armies. And in that battle, they mess up the orcs, and they've also got the same razorback motif on their helmets. Definitely an amazing looking unit. And their commanding officer, he appears to be a lot like Dain. He's got more gold armor than the rest of his soldiers. So for example, his head crest is gold, which I quite like. And he's got the same falchion kind of shaped blade. Definitely a cool looking warrior. The polearm units. Starting off with the Erebor halberdiers. Now you don't see these guys in the film, I believe, but their design is very much inspired by the other warriors of Erebor. So their first layer of defense is chain mail covering them head to toe, over which they've got their scale armor, on top of which they've also added plate, and then their helmets are a bit more basic. A very, very cool looking unit. The halberds that they wield look amazing, also very geometrically shaped, with some variance in their shapes too. It all looks very Dwarven. You can clearly tell the designers of the modern know down to the letter what aesthetic they're going for with each faction, and these Erebor halberdiers just look amazing. But yeah, I can't really think of much more than that. Only thing with these guys is be careful with archers because they do not have shields, and while their armor is fairly good in melee against bowmen, it won't be that great. So you have to be careful with how you use these guys. Their commanding officer is another Dwarven line infantryman with a more gilded basic helmet, and that's about it. And then we have what I probably would consider my favourite unit in the faction, the Tomb Wardens. And tell me these guys are not arguably the coolest unit that we've seen, not just in this video, but in all of the videos I've made about Total War Rise of Mordor. That blue and that gold plate is phenomenal. Their weapons are gold. Phenomenal. Oh god, they're just so damn amazing looking. I feel I'm wearing out the word amazing by saying it so much, but they are. I don't have words, man. It's just... Yeah, I love the geometrical patterns on their armor, just like inlaid onto the fabric that they've got. You've then got these blue breastplates over which they've got even more plate. That's gold, and then they've got their helmets, which are fully defensive, which are gold, and they've got these golden halberds. Just, yeah. Now, as far as I know, you can only get these guys late in the campaign when you recapture, I think, Mount Gundabad, and these are like a one-of-a-kind unit you can get from there. And where is their commanding officer? Wow, their commanding officer looks cool too. He's equipped much the same way, covered in gold. His shield is a deep blue, rimmed in gold. That looks amazing. Does he have a sword blade? Yes, he does. Is his blade gold? Oh my god, his blade is gold too. That's just a flex. A gilded golden blade. It's gonna get scratched up immediately the moment you see battle, but you're literally killing him with gold. I approve. I very much approve. So yeah, don't expect to see these guys in your army compositions that much, especially when you're playing a campaign. In free play, yeah, you can bring them in, but in campaign, you won't be so lucky. With these guys covered, I believe we've gone over every infantry unit that Erebor can bring to the battlefield, and now it's time to go on to their ranged units, starting with the Dwarven ranged travellers. And these guys also look pretty cool. They're just Dwarven travellers, as the name suggests. They're not armoured, at least not much. Some of them might have some pauldrons, but not really much more than that. Some leather gloves, just regular travelling clothes, and they've got short bows with them for hunting, which they now use for battle. So these are the lowest type of ranged units that the dwarves can bring to the battlefield, and while they're not exactly much to look at, they get the job done. They'll definitely be part of your starting lineup for your armies, combining with the Dwarven Travellers, the Swordman unit, and also with the Miners, with the pickaxes. These will be the building blocks of your very basic armies before you begin to expand. They're better than Orcs though, they can hold their own against them. And their commanding officer is just another regular Dwarven warrior. Now let's look at their bigger brothers, the Archers of the Red Mountains. And these guys are also much like the Warriors of the Red Mountains. These are rare units, you can only get them once you unlock certain locations, so you don't expect to see a lot of them in the battlefield. They've got the same scale armor, they've got recurve bows, which is another allusion to their eastern heritage, and they're very much more heavily armored than the others are. These guys, I believe, you could probably throw into battle and you could somewhat do damage with them. Whereas if you threw the Dwarven Travellers into battle against anything other than the lowest of infantry in a flank attack, they'd be destroyed. These guys might be able to mix it up a bit in battle. And where's the commanding officer? Yeah, another guy just wearing plate armor. The same kind of aesthetic we went over before. Still a very cool looking bowman unit though. And now we come to a kind of unique unit that the dwarves can bring to the battlefield. Erebor axe throwers, and like the name suggests, they do in fact throw hatchets at the enemy, and it is quite the sight to see. They're nowhere near as ranged as, say, bowmen are, and that's one of the weaknesses of this unit. If they get focused down by enemy archers, they'll be obliterated because they do have shields, but their armor is very much lacking. So you really don't want to waste these guys. I mean, it's arguable whether or not you believe it's better to have the enemy archer units waste all their ammunition on one of these units rather than, say, destroying one of your line infantry units. But I believe you want to make the most out of those axes when you can. And if you use these guys as a flanking unit, emptying their reserves of axes before throwing them into battle, they will do quite a lot of damage. In regards to their armor, they've just got not much. Some of them just have leather coats, maybe some of brigandines, leather gloves, some pauldrons, and they've got that same basic shaped shield. Even so, and some have helmets, the more basic dwarven skull caps. So yeah, one thing you can do with these guys is throw them into battle once they've wasted their hatchets and their throwing weapons. That's at least one thing you can do with them. But even so, a very unique unit for the faction, but arguably not a very powerful one unless used the right way. And we come to the dwarves' best ranged unit as far as I'm concerned, the Erebor crossbows. And this is one of the few units in Middle-earth that can use a crossbow. I believe the only other one being the Uruk-hai crossbows in the Isengard roster. These guys just have it all. Covered in plate again, like most of their faction from head to toe. They've got the big crossbows, which are amazing at blasting holes through enemy units. However, once they've run out of crossbow shots, crossbow bolts, they can turn over to their melee weapons and get into it as good as the rest of them can. They're good melee and they're good archer units. So these guys will definitely be a cornerstone of your armies as you keep building them up. They're very good units. I want to impress that on you. I don't know if you see them in the films. Definitely you see the Erebor style armor, but I don't know if you actually see crossbowmen in the films like this. and the commanding officer is this elite unit, who looks much the same as other Dwarven warriors. And with these guys covered, that is the last of the Dwarven archer units. However, the Dwarves also do have cavalry, even if it is somewhat lacking. They have escort mercenaries, and these are the guys who also provide the middle tier cavalry support for the armies of Dale, and it makes sense that these guys would also fight for the Dwarves because they're neighbours to Erebor. So they provide the Dwarves with much needed mobility and striking power, and even though they're not the best, they get the job done. They're equipped with the same Dwarven shields as the line infantry. They've got the same, I guess, scale armour, breastplates. You could say that the escort riders of Dale have, and they've also got leather armour too. They've got the same spiky helmets and the same unarmoured horses, and their swords their swords are the same too, I'm pretty sure. They're not really shock cavalry, but even so, if you hit enemy forces with them the right way, they can definitely break units, and they're a good way of fending off other enemy cavalry, say to buy time for you to set up your spear formations and other such units, try and defend against enemy strengthened cavalry. It seems like their commanding officer fits in with the rest of his units. Wait, no, this is him. Yeah, because he's got a golden breastplate as opposed to anything else, but yeah, their commanding officer is much the same as the rest of his units. So, with these guys covered, we've gone over all of Erebor's cavalry, and while it's not much, it is something. It gives them some ability to protect themselves and go on the offensive, and it helps round out the faction, because they're so overwhelmingly powerful when it comes to infantry, and with their fair archer support, it makes sense that they're going to be lacking in some area, and cavalry is the one area that makes sense the most. Hopefully the creators add in the goat cavalry from the films, but I believe they said they're not going to do it unless they've changed their minds, but I'd love to see them in the game someday. And of course the dwarves do also have artillery too. They have onagers, and the same thing I've said for onagers in other videos goes for here. It gives them some flexibility when using artillery against enemy fortifications, whereas otherwise they just have to storm enemy buildings. However, even so, these onagers are not the match of other artillery pieces wielded by other formations and other factions in Middle-earth. The only thing I can say is hopefully they add in those massive dwarven windlasses from The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Those would be cool to see, this gigantic ballista for the faction. Which I think they said they might be adding those to the Dain faction. So if so, I hope they add them to the dwarves as well. As you can see, their crew are heavily armoured, much the same way as the crossbowmen are. And unlike other factions which wield a very much unarmoured peasants kind of to wield their siege equipment, these guys can get into it if they're attacked directly. Having looked at the units of the faction as a whole, let's look at the faction itself. Overall, it's very infantry oriented, which makes sense, and I believe the developers have said that it's the most defensive faction in the game, and with all the heavy armour supported by all their heavy units, I tend to believe them when they say that. These guys are the kings of defense, and on the offense they are incredibly devastating too, their only weakness being that their cavalry is very lacking, but it's a fair trade-off everything else that they get. I absolutely love the faction, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the coolest factions that they've made. The design just looks so damn amazing. I'm always more than happy to use them in battles, and you can make some absolutely amazing and fantastic scenario battles with these guys when you bring them to the battlefield. Having said all of that, I hope that you guys have enjoyed the video. Not to worry, I will be making more in this series. I don't know who we're doing next, but there is someone coming up next. I hope you guys have really enjoyed the video. If you have, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel, because I would like some more subscribers. Before that out of the way, have a wonderful day. This is Jakov, signing out.